Hello and welcome. It is your weekly program that has always been concerned with the virtual gathering, that is, the gathering that occurs on air and online. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, thanks for your time. A very warm welcome to all of you who are following us via the World Wide Web. And among that group, you are sure to find Canon Dr. Stephen Fields, a Barbadian priest serving in Canada, who, interestingly enough, after last week's program, informed me that our last featured community, St. Patrick's, was often referred to as Barbados's 12th parish. Thank you, Dr. Fields. And so from St. Patrick's, or as it were, Barbados's 12th parish, we have made our way in a southerly direction to a community whose economic transformation has been inextricably linked to our airport. Orlando Gabby Scott is a proud product of this community. He begins by historicizing his beloved community.
The village of Charnocks was born out of civil plantation because in the 1600s, Captain Joseph Charnock, a Lancashire man, he was able to buy property that was owned by civil plantation. Apparently, after Judge Richard Civil died intestate, there was a quarrel between the wife and the son in terms of the property. He was put in court, and she got 97 acres, which she sold to Captain Joseph Charnock. And of course, the village is called Charnocks. Charnocks remained in the Charnock family for about 3 generations. Then it was bought over by the Eswicks. Of course, these are all white plantation owners. And after it was sold out, I think it was around 1915, the Beisers, 2 Jews, A.L. Beiser and Joshua Beiser, bought the Charnocks. And I should also make the point that Charnock family, who bought over Sewell, also bought over a little plantation called Maxon. Yeah, Maxon, that is where the runway now is. So that's where my parents came from. My great-grandmother, Liza, she was born at Maxon. My mom was born at Maxon. And they all came to Charnocks because Charnocks was developed in 1915 when the Beisers sold it out. I'm not too sure if they were plantation owners themselves or they were real estate people, but of course, you know, the Jews had a way of making money, which makes a lot of sense. Then it was bought by Graham Giddens. Graham Giddens, whom you may have heard about, he represented Christ Church during the 1950s. And then it is now owned by the Francis family. Fred Francis. Fred, I'll talk to him a little later when I talk about the icons of Charnocks. But he began small, but he really built, I can't compare him to Jane Goddard, but he really was an iconic figure.
Exactly where in Christchurch does Charnocks lie? And what about its neighbouring communities and the relationship that existed between the community and these other surrounding communities?
It's very interesting because Charnocks is bordered by Sewell on the south, Spencer's on the southeast, Hopefield on the east, Louders on the north, and Corverley on the west. During the 1950s, the employment was created by the plantations around us. And you see those ladies, mothers and daughters with hoes on the shoulders heading on to the plantations early in the morning around 6:30, 7 o'clock. Because the earlier they were able to weed their farmers, I used to call it weeding farmers, they had to come back home, look after the stocks, sheep and goats and cows and whatever, and also prepare sometimes lunch. If you had children, you had to plant the children here and send them all to primary school. So what they did was to go into the plantation lands early, and then lunchtime they would come home and take a break. But what I'm saying is that the great majority of the people who live up to the 1960s on these districts were employed at those plantations. And a lot of the land in Charnocks was bought by persons who had gone to Panama or who had gone to Panama and entered the United States and brought back money. And you could have, as a little boy growing up in the late 1940s when they went to school, and in the 1950s. You could tell those persons who had emigrated because all of them wore shoes, and they dressed differently. And you know, some had glasses, and some even had the accent, something I never forgot. Were those guys who went away on contract cutting canes, all of them would come back with the hair conk. You know, they slick down, hey man, New York is a great place. And they didn't go to New York, they went to Florida. It's a great place, man. And how your mama doing? How your sister doing? You know, but some would give you a US dollar. But growing up in Charnocks was fun. Charnocks was sweet.
This church's story is very important to Orlando Gabby Scott, for the sweat and tears of his great-great-grandmother are in a sense enshrined in these walls. And whenever he assembles here to be in fellowship with others and to worship his Creator, in a sense, he is honoring the work of his ancestors.
There were two churches, St. Bartholomew, which, as you know, celebrated its 190th anniversary. It was finished only last month. That was built by Reverend Coleridge. The land was donated by the Lanes who owned Sewell Plantation. And it's interesting too because my great-great-grandmother, Sarah Lemon Powlett Hardin, she worked at Sewell. In fact, she was one of the enslaved who built the church, St. Bartholomew Church. But she said they used to bring the stones on their heads. And strangely enough, they did not worship in the church earlier. They worshipped underneath a silk cotton tree in the yard. That was told to me by an aunt who was born in 1902. But see, my great-great-grandmother, Sarah Lemon Powlett Hardin, she was a centenarian. And then, of course, she would talk to the kids. The hurricane blew it down, and then it was rebuilt. But most of the people from Charnocks went to St. Bartholomew's, people from Fair Valley, from Leadville, from Pilgrim Road. But now you find people from St. Philip who are attending the church at St. Bartholomew. But there was another church in Charnocks, which was the Pentecostal church. And this was, of course, not like the CD St. Bartholomew where you sang and you reverential. But this church, there was the hallelujah, the amen. And when, during certain sessions, they would bring in their colleagues, their brothers and sisters from the other churches, and they had a revival. And it was hallelujah. And we enjoyed that. A lot of the people in Charnocks benefited, I think, from the spirituality that we got both from St. Bartholomew and from Pastor Green's Pentecostal church. He was like a bishop, he really, and people respected and loved him. He was a carpenter.
Gabby made an important point: respect, which community members give to elders and figures of authority in the community. All that is left is an open space and some modern houses that occupy portions of the land. But for many years, the boys of the area assembled here weekdays for their primary education.
The headmaster was Vernon Pedro Welch. She was a foundation boy. And we had some teachers like Mr. Paris, Mr. Lincoln Knight, Austin Nurse, who looked after us as like they looked after fathers, And I remember they would try to get you into the secondary schools sometimes by lessons, having lessons. And Glenville Armstrong himself, as well as James Sparky Blackman.
In this tranquil wooded area stands a monument to education. Though it is a far cry from what it was in those early days, among these lovely mahogany trees, in this space are precious memories. And if walls and trees could talk, you would hear.
The girls' school was run by, and I must say this, the girls' school was run by Sophie Durant. She taught my mother, and she taught my sister, she taught generations. She was my great aunt, but she was like a tyrant. And I don't think a lot of people, when you spoke of Sophie Durant, you were speaking about somebody like Napoleon for the girls, because she would lash you, and her language was not the one that he would want. She was a little insulting. I mean, that was my great. I can speak about her freely, and she's dead long ago. But these are the kinds of institutions around which we grew up. And she lived at Seaview because her father was the bookkeeper at Seaview, down where the Silver Sands Hotel is now. Of that property, that property was theirs. And you could not, none of the children could pass her. They had to walk behind her or walk around her to get to school because she was very imperious, you know, and her sisters, who also taught at St. Bartholomew's Girls, Miss Izzy, she was different. The grown-ups and people who were in control of certain institutions, you had to fall into line. And I thought that is what helped us during the 1940s and 50s and 60s to be the country that we now are. For example, I went to school at a college in England, and there were some people from other places. But do you know that I was treated differently because one of the tutors said, Barbadians have a way of behaving well. We have lost a lot of that. And I felt very proud when they said that of us. And some also made jokes of Bajans because they said, you know, that there were more. There was a guy who went to the same college I went to, Ruskin. He was a teacher. He said, but you know, he was more king than the king. You know, he walked with his brolly, his suits, you know. And I laughed because the truth is, my sister's husband, he was a guard at Parliament. He never said that he was a guard. He said he was a policeman. Anyway, he asked me if I would like to see Parliament. I told him, of course I would. And he took me down to Parliament, the House of Commons and House of Lords. And at that place is something to look at, you know, the pictures and stuff. So as we were going down, he met a lord whom he knew well. Of course, he was a guard, so he knew them. Suppose his name is McCaskey, Lord McCaskey. Meet my brother-in-law, Orlando. He's a member of the House of Assembly in Barbados. And my shoes almost dropped off. I said, suppose the man had asked me about how the House in Barbados is done. I could not answer him. So Bajans had, I don't know, and I hope the Bajans who lived in England would not put me down for it. But some of them had a way of behaving that, you know, in fact, and my brother-in-law, he was, and he was very conservative. He liked Miss Thatcher, and he bought, you know, he behaved like as if he were a lord himself. I don't know what went wrong with what he said, but that was the kind of person. But Charnocks are full of jokes. I mean, like I said, I mean, life, when you're poor, you grow up poor. You had to find ways of survival and surviving. And we dealt with, you know, we were able to grow up through education because education was what really helped us along. But that is the Charnocks I knew.
From a highbrow Barbadian character, so to speak, back to a character here in this community.
In terms of characters, I don't think there's any district in Barbados that had the characters like Charnocks. We had Saman, Leonard Hines, Falkirk, and a cousin of mine too, Labata, Sonny, Emperor Selassie. And that is strange because he used to cut canes in Florida during the 1950s. So he came back. I mean, I didn't know him before he went, but I saw his life, the way in which he deported himself. He never combed his hair. He often rode bareback, and his language was completely different from ours. So in 1970s, when I attended Mona, I had to write an essay on Rastafarianism because, you know, it was growing then. So what struck me was that he was called Selassie, the Emperor. So I said, wait, what motivated you to change your name? He said, well, you know, I was, you know, I met the Jamaicans and I tended to understand and to like their religion. And I said, I suppose he was the first Rasta, Bajan Rasta. I mean, I really laughed because and he could tell lies. I give a joke because I think it is necessary to tell this joke. He was a very clever guy. He went into Bridgetown, stayed a bit too long, and then the last bus was 8 o'clock. He didn't have money to pay bus fare or to pay the bus. So he got this taxi, sat in the back seat. When he got by St. Bartholomew Church, he asked the taxi man how late it is. And he walked right over the church walls, the graveyard, And he said the taxi man took off and left it tearing the road because he obviously wanted the taxi man to believe that he was a duppy. So he was a clever guy. I mean, and at nights he would come to your home or sit down or run the street lights and captivate all of us young people. But then you were so afraid to go home because in those days there weren't street lights per se. So that was a lot of fun. Then there was Falcourt. Falcourt could use any say shoes, ice cream, buses, and he would create some fun and jokes over those, and we would be laughing.
Many communities, there are some peculiarities. In this instance, a number of unusual buildings that were sited here. These buildings went through a number of incarnations. One such was the use as a community center for the youngsters. It was a fine example of how communities play an important role in every aspect of our lives.
The armed forces were stationed in Barbados during World War II. And my father worked with them, but there were some green barracks, which you may not have known, located. There were 3 of them. One was to the west of in line though with the terminal building, the old terminal building. And there were 2 which the police occupied and the maids occupied. And there was another official port health persons occupied them. People also resided in them. Those long green barracks, the soldiers used to be in them, you know, and I thought they should have been kept. They were all pushed down, and I was saddened when they pushed them down. I thought they should have kept them as for posterity so that people would understand where we came from. But there was a sergeant called Sergeant Vaughan, Clary Vaughan. He would allow us to come into the barracks, play table tennis, play drafts, play dominoes. And he would not lock the barracks. Because in those days the policemen were immigration officers, so they would every time an airplane came in, they would go over and do their duties. So I asked him one day, because I was always precocious, Sergeant, why you just allow me to stay in here? He said, Gabby, it's simple. If you all are in the barracks, I don't have to look for one. I said, oh, that was the psychology because he would encourage all the boys to, to come over there. And we grown up having a tremendous respect for policemen. We had people like Corporal Wilkinson, Sergeant Haynes, and Paris. Those guys, I mean, they would always be mentoring you how to behave. And in those days, you couldn't buy a newspaper, the Advocate newspaper. And he would allow us, and particularly me, to read the paper every morning before I left for school. So that the criticisms that are, this is not the United States of America, this is Barbados. And so what institution that may affect people over there, not here. And so we grew up having a tremendous respect for the police. And the truth is, we did not have a lot of problems with the law in Charnocks, nor Pilgrim Road, nor Ferry Valley, because of the kind of relationship that there was between the law and ourselves. I'm not saying that we were Puritans.
A discussion about this community must include something about Fred, an entrepreneur who made very good use of the available resources around him to produce product and provide services that were needed by others. Of course, other entrepreneurial skills are today celebrated in this community.
Fred had begun like any other poor country boy. But he was very creative. He had a baker shop. He had a dry goods shop. He had a lime kiln in down Fairview, and that was for building, the lime from that. He also had a truck, X1188, I'll never forget that, and a motor car, X1655. Now, when I was a little boy, we would wake up early in the mornings at the break of dawn and go to his baker shop to buy bread, for school and for breakfast and stuff, and the aroma of the turnovers, your mouth ran water. And Miss Frances would give us a turnover or 2. We would take the turnover and place it in the salt bread, And, and when you tell young people these things, they would laugh. But he was really the icon in Charnocks. And now, when you will see his son Curtis has actually spread the business over. But then, as small as Charnocks was, I'll show you, we were entrepreneurs. And funny enough, people sometimes criticize us as not having the spirit of entrepreneurship. That's not true. We had no less than 7 shops in Charnocks. Fred's was the biggest. And of course, I am told by some of the older men that he was their mentor because they used to take his bread out, and he taught one of the guys named German, whose real name was Arthur Weeks. And he built a shop, which was about 10 or 12 yards away from Fred's. But his shop was different because he was like the Las Vegas of Charnocks. He also baked his bread, but what he did, especially during the crop season, we had the jukeboxes, and all of us. I mean, I couldn't stay too long because my father used to give me until 8 o'clock to get in the house. But especially during the crop season, you know, guys from all around, from Fairview, Leadville, Penny Hole, Rock Hall, Ferry Valley would come around a German shop, and we would have a ball. The liquor was flowing, the spirits were high, you know. And German would bake chicken and pork, and fellas would have a ball because German recognized, he was smart, he recognized this is the crop season and it doesn't last forever. So he made as much money he possibly can out of that. Then he also had a motor car, which was used for funerals, weddings, anybody who's going to the hospital. So these fellas were entrepreneurs. Then next to Fred Francis' shop was Isamina's shop, Isamina Morrison's shop. Fred and Isamina, whose real name was Wilhelmina, were cousins. And below the ridge, Charnocks Ridge, Villiers had a shop, small one. Down the road, near to the church, G. Roberts had a shop, but she emigrated. And up at Charnocks, Juju had a shop. And Miss Doughty also had a shop. I mean, not large shops, but they were entrepreneurs. And those businesses went out after, during the 60s when supermarkets were being developed, because the supermarkets prices were cheaper, and of course they had a wider range of goods. But I must say also, as Bobby Morris made a point last Sunday, that many of us used to go to James Clark's shop in Seaview and to Shine shop in Leadville. And during the crop season, those shops, even German couldn't beat them because this is near Searles, and this is where the money was flowing during the crop season. But sometimes our donkey cart, because the walk from Fairview with basket on your head was a bit too hard. So we would take the donkey carts, and 2 or 3 persons would have their goods and transport. And then in Pilgrim Road, the McConneys, Frank McConney, who became the general manager of Light and Power, his father, Owen McConney, had a shop, a wall shop, which was a little more sophisticated. And his sister, I don't remember her Christian name, Mrs. Roach, which was the Pilgrim Great House, they also had a shop. But during the 60s and the 70s, some people started going to Bridgetown to shop in Roebuck Street. My mom, she also used to go down to Mr. Ford. So that was where the entrepreneurship began in terms of Charnocks. But the airport, though, was where we got employment. But when the civil airport started to develop, a lot of the young men and women started to get jobs there as maids, working with BW, British West Indies Airways, British Overseas Airways Corporation, TransCanada, Air France. Some became clerks working at the airport. So you see how the economic development around socially and economically transformed Charnocks. And Charnocks became a bustling district full of effervescence. I mean, one of the things also that depleted Charnocks, I thought, was immigration. You know, there's not one home in Charnocks from which people did not emigrate to Canada, to the United States, and particularly to the United Kingdom. In fact, there were a number of families in Charnocks who actually fully emigrated. The Hunters, the Morrisons, the Weeks family, a range of Weeks family. And every family, like I said, and I said, like, you know, in my old age, I lie down and every family, there was someone who emigrated to Britain. Even some of us went down to Guyana. I had a great uncle who went down to Guyana, and some of my family went to Panama. Also, the Scots and the Mosleys went to Panama, because I grew up with the Mosleys, Lashley, Durant, Carter family, and they never came back. 5 of them never came back, and I think that my aunt told me that is what killed my great grandmother, because she said that when she was dying, she went to the window and said, out of 7, only 1, which was my grandmother. 1 had gone to Guyana, British Guyana at that time, Demerara. We don't know if they died, if they were killed during the explosions or malaria or what, but they never came back. And I only have had 1 family who went down to Panama who came back. That was John Scott from my father's side. But a lot of them did not return to Barbados. And so that generation of men who were born and women who were born in the 1930s and in the 1940s, who would have populated Charnocks, they had emigrated. So it's not the same. And I think when we look at districts, sometimes we have to look at the issues that create depletion and growth and all of that. I think that, not that we did not gain from immigration, because some of my sisters went away as nurses, and I used to look forward to the pound note, $4.80. I was going to foundation those days, and when you had the pound note, you could splurge. And also they sent that money to help develop the homes, you know, and so from an economical standpoint, it grew. But in terms of the population, I mean, not that people did not come into Charnocks, but the population sort of fell. And one of the things, too, of living in Charnocks was this. You know, in the old days, every Sunday afternoon, our recreation was at the airport, because this is where the lights were. I mean, because most of us had kerosene lamps. We would go up there sometimes and do our homework. But the fun was when buses came in, bringing people from the rural districts. Man, you would see them clamoring to get on top of the thing to see people going overseas, and especially during the 50s and 60s, when immigration to Britain was in its full swing. Every Saturday and Sunday, people going over on British Airways, or the British Overseas Airways Corporation, as it was called in those days. I mean, just hundreds of people clamoring, you know, people hugging one another. My sister went in 1962, but the older sister went by the Sorrento in 1961, MV Sorrento. So to see the airport in those days, and we would be laughing and smiling, because that was our home, so to speak. And we would go there at evenings and spend time, you know, then go home, because that is where the lights were. And one of the things, too, that as a child, I was enthralled with seeing Sir Grantley, especially when negotiations were going on for the federal government. Sir Grantley and Dr. Cummins, because, you know, Dr. Cummins succeeded Sir Grantley as Premier. You would see the two of them having discussions outside, and they would walk slowly in and they would be talking. Of course, you wouldn't go close to them. And the other guy whom we got to know very well was the Right Excellent Sir Frank Leslie Walcott. And of course, Sir Grantley was also the Right Excellent. He would be going out to meetings in Brussels and Geneva or wherever he was going. And in those days, we used to call him the heavy roller. And we would shout at him and he would shake back at us. And we would also see like Dr. Williams and those persons coming in from overseas. So you got to see those persons in the flesh. And as a boy, I remember seeing Johnny Nash, who just died recently. When he came in here with Joe Tudor, our comedian Joe Tudor, I met also Johnny Mathis. I interviewed him actually when he was at The Advocate. And Brooke Benton, I was a little boy, and I touched him, you know, his shirt, and you know, you want to show off that you, because I was able to go into the customs in those days, because my father worked at the airport, and the customs officers gave me some liberty. And you know, you're able to see those stars. Some of them you saw at the distance, and then the cricketers, when the cricketers came in, like Sir Frank Worrell and those, you would run to the airport to see them. You know, so living near to the airport, you got a first-hand look at those celebrities that came in. I would not want to have lived in any other district but Charnocks. It's a lovely place. The effervescence and the vitality it had during the 50s and 60s I don't know if any other district in this country had it. And I suppose by having the airport near to us too, you know, a lot of the airport workers used to come up there. So it was a beautiful place to be. And the years I spent in it, I think, really grew me into the kind of person that I am. Self-confidence, you know, meeting people that you'd never thought you would have met. So that was it. Charnocks.
Being a part of a community can make us feel as though we are part of something greater than ourselves. It can give us opportunities to connect with people, to reach for our goals and make us feel safe and secure. Orlando Gabby Scott epitomizes the above, for his love of this community is undeniable. We look forward to purchasing his soon-to-be-released book on Charnocks. Well, that's it for this week, and that's it for Christchurch. Many thanks to all of you who have participated, and thanks to our viewers. Until next week at the same time, when we make our way to the parish of St. Michael, I'm Sherwood McCaskey. It's goodbye for now.